Friends, welcome to a unique episode here on the Thinking Tree. Jeff and I are wanting to take the opportunity to discuss a very current event. In the last several days, the world has been on pins and needles, really, watching the atrocities and the horrors of what has been going on in Israel. And there's a lot that can be said. And so today we want to ask an important question. How should Christians respond to the current war in Israel? So today, as we're recording this, it is Wednesday, October 11th, and we've seen a lot since the weekend. Well, we've seen Saturday morning. I think we all woke up to the news.
Yeah, the shock of it.
That there had been a massive attack from a terrorist organization based out of the Gaza Strip in southern Israel into Israel, and that there were many casualties, and that has since ballooned from the initial shock of paratrooping soldiers and ground offensive, in addition to rocket offensives, to the butchering of people, the butchering of civilians, the butchering of women and children. Just atrocious sights and stories that we've been hearing. And there's a lot of history to discuss. But it is important that we recognize where we are at as we've heard the news. So we've heard of the gunmen. We've heard of the indiscriminate killing. We've heard of the kidnappings. Most of the nations on the earth are condemning these actions by Hamas. But Jeff, as you've been watching the news, I know we're paying attention to these outlets. We're trying to understand what is actually going on. What are some of the things that you've witnessed so far in the last several days?
Yeah, so I follow a lot of interesting accounts on Twitter, on the ground Israeli accounts, trying to go around the mainstream media in the West, just because it's going to be sanitized.
A narrative, yeah. And
it's not that I want to see gruesome images, but I want to see what's really happening so I can understand the extent of it. And man, I cried.
Yeah,
I'll be honest with you, I cried Saturday morning because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was crazy. So you have to sort of understand the geography down in that part of the world. So yeah, they broke through the security border, the fence, using technology that I don't think Israel understood had been smuggled into Gaza.
Yeah.
And so it surprised the Israelis. A great intelligence failure on their part, and they're going to have to fix that. Overran the guard stations locally there and killed a lot of Israeli soldiers.
Yeah.
But the really tragic thing was the music festival that was going on, and 260 young people, teenagers in their 20s, slaughtered.
Who were there celebrating peace?
Yes, they were there to celebrate peace, and naive and didn't understand what was happening, and they just got cut down like animals. You have to understand. You heard about these little kibbutzes.
Yeah.
In southern Israel. They're very isolated communities with not much around, and they're very self-sustaining, and they're proud of that, which is great. But then if you don't have weapons, and these guys come in with heavy weapons, it's shooting fish in a barrel. And the things that they did in these kibbutzes with these communities that couldn't defend themselves, you can't even describe it, how awful it is. Babies butchered and women raped, and the kidnappings, which may be worse than the killings.
Yeah.
So it's the sickest thing since ISIS, that's for sure. And you're seeing a lot of that now. Hamas has learned from ISIS. They've just used the same tactics. So it's absolutely terrific. Or horrible. So now we're talking, like you said, on Wednesday. This isn't going to post until 5 days from now, so things could look different. It could be better, could be worse. But as of right now, tonight, as we're recording this, it's hard to watch.
Now, there's a lot of history, and we both alluded to it. This is not as simple as there's a modern day conflict here.
Right.
There is some history that goes back 50, 60 years, and then there's history that goes back
4,000 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's ancient history here, and then there's modern history. I think it would be helpful for our listeners. We're not trying to be the exhaustive experts on it, but I think it is good and part of the narrative that we're discussing, and that's it's by nature a part of this. when we're discussing the history. Both of us have the privilege of going to Israel.
Yeah.
We've had the privilege of talking with Israelis. We've had the privilege of talking with Israelis who have served in the military and who have even been inhabiting the land for those 40 or 50 years. And so have remembered what it was like.
Yeah.
In this, I think there's a couple key points in history, and we can go beyond that as well. But I think a couple of big ones that I think bear mentioning. We're talking about the formal delineation of land as we see it today. We're going back to the 1960s, and we're going to an event that we call the 6-Day War. But an event that really established the modern lines. It established
67 lines. You hear it mentioned a lot, right? Right.
Yeah, and even though Gaza wasn't in its current form back then,
right?
Because that was later. I think that was a big moment that they keep going back to,
right?
Because that from that moment is then when they had their intifadas and what came from there. Right. So that's a big moment.
Yeah.
Another big moment that goes before that would be if we're talking about what happens in Scripture. In Israel, and a lot can be said about that.
Yeah.
Now, if we don't go super far back, we just want to go to modern, what's going on with Gaza today, and we were talking about this, we're going to talk about when Gaza was essentially released from Israel's care.
Right.
Meaning before, in the 90s and in early 2000, there was an Israeli presence inside Gaza.
Yes.
There were settlements and there were people living there. And it was only because of a certain accord that the Israelis left Gaza and then set up a block, essentially an area.
Yes.
And so that was a unique time as well. So there are these landmarks, and I didn't mention them chronologically because I don't think that they're just in the chronology. These are big moments for people. Some are bigger than others. Today you may be watching the news and a Palestinian supporter or somebody who's sensitive to the plight of Palestine in general, or the people that are Palestinian, they may emphasize what happened in 2003, 2005. Or you may have somebody who's older and who may say, but going back to them taking our land in 1967, and so depending on who you're talking to, may be a bigger thing. And then you might have people who are hardline, extremists who are saying, according to Quran, I need to, and I'm not going to finish this statement because they're already doing it, or trying to do it. So, in terms of those things, what are some of those big moments as you think about the history of Israel?
Well, and everything comes back to the claim on the land, and so you see people arguing it over all over the place, and a lot of times without real knowledge.
Yeah,
but it's like any other argument in any land in the entire globe. There has been exchanges of control and ownership, right? Wars are fought. There's consequences of wars. Every single nation on the earth has been conquered over and over and over again. So this particular piece of land, which is obviously very important for every Abrahamic faith, right? Judaism, Christianity, Islam. It's important land. But there's a long history going back to Abraham, right?
Yeah.
So it is a 4,000-year-old story. And you've got all the promises given to the patriarchs that we can read about in the book of Genesis. It's right there. You've got the conquering of Canaan, from Moses to Joshua, the conquering of Canaan. And then there's the Romans play a huge part in this, which is amazing, getting in all the way up to accelerating into the New Testament. So you've always had these Jewish kingdoms in the land. There's no question about who the land belongs to, unless you can dig up Canaanites today.
Yeah.
The Jews are the people, the Hebrews that became the Israelites, that became the Jews, right? They are the owners of the land. God gave it to them, but even more so, there's a claim there. And there's a people that still exists.
Correct. Or ethnically.
Yes.
Even.
Right. Like I said, you can't find Canaanites today. So, because it'd be nice to go beyond the Hebrews to the Canaanites, right? But we can't find them. So that matters. And it's the Romans then that really, they coined the term Palestine.
Correct.
And
for the region. Not as a people.
Right. Around the year 132, there was a second revolt. We always know about the revolt in 70. There's a second revolt in 132 called the Bar Kokhba revolt. And after that, the Jews are expelled from the city. Hadrian, the emperor, comes in and rebuilds the area, rebuilds Jerusalem as a Roman city. Right, messes everything up, by the way, for touring.
He paves over roads.
Oh yeah, exactly, exactly. But yeah, and so he names it Palestine after the Jews greatest enemy, the Philistines. That's where that comes from. So there is no such thing, like I think you said, there's no such areas as Palestine in ancient history. Correct. There is no such thing as a Palestinian.
Correct. As a people group.
They're Arabs.
Correct.
From all over the region.
Yeah.
So these things get really messed up, and maybe I'll do an Unshakable about this at some point.
I mean, I think that'd be helpful. I mean, I know you want to say more, but to piggyback off of what you're saying about the name, I do think that matters as we're trying to understand what's going on right now. There's one thing to say, if he's, Korean, that, if we now hate Koreans, like that is a very fierce line to draw to say hate Koreans. However, and I'm not advocating the hate of Palestinians, but the reality of calling somebody a Palestinian is more like calling somebody where they're regionally located, like, I'm a Southern Californian.
Yeah.
That's really what it's more like. Right. But there is actually a longer lineage to me, or a different ethnicity, that Southern California doesn't describe ethnicity.
Right.
It doesn't diminish the value of human life. That does not diminish the value of human worth. That is not making a qualitative statement about the people who inhabit the land, or who our culture calls Palestinian.
Yeah.
But I think that is helpful as we're trying to understand what's going on in the region, that we're not talking about Israelis and Palestinians. We're talking about Israelis and Arabs from other nations who have come into, particularly into Gaza, and then really have formed the terrorist organization known as Hamas. Hamas is not an organization of Palestinians, just to be really clear. It's an organization based of Arabs who from multiple nations who are not from Israel.
The founder lives in Qatar.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if most people know that.
Right.
I think sometimes they think it's just these people who have always lived there.
Right.
There are some people who are, who we may refer to as a Palestinian, who do have lineage in the land. Hundreds of years. Of course, hundreds and hundreds of years.
Well, and if I can pick up on the history then, because the Arabs do conquer the land in the 7th century AD. So think about the math on this. The Jews have a claim on the land going back to the 15th century BC. 15 centuries later, by the way, in between that, so the Arabs conquer it in around 635 AD. In between that, you have the area being Christianized. So you got Constantine, and you've got the Byzantine rule over the area. So it goes from the Jews to the Christians, and finally to the Arabs, to the Muslims, this brand new religion called Islam in the 7th century AD.
Correct.
And yes, the Arabs then hold the majority in that area. By the way, still coexisted with Jews all through this period.
And Christians.
Yeah. We all live together. But the Arabs do control that land up until about the 13th century, and the Mamluks come in. They're Egyptian. They take control, and then the Ottomans conquer the area, and it becomes Turkish. So for Arab Palestinians to say, well, this is our land, it's a specious claim. Not only is it not the most ancient claim by a long shot, but what about the Turks? What about the Ottomans?
There are many other groups.
Yeah, exactly. Now the Ottomans were on the losing side of World War I. They fought with the Axis, and that's what gave the British control over the area, and that's what led to the Zionist movement, and that's what led to the UN getting involved. After World War II. So you have 1948. So you have three major wars fought by the Jews, 48, 67, 73, to hold on to the land. And then, like you said, fast forward to 2005, that's where the Gaza Strip really becomes key. And what happened at that time was the Israelis want peace so bad. They really do. And this is what doesn't come out in the news as it should. They have offered and offered and offered. Now, they're not perfect in this.
Correct.
They have not always treated Palestinians well. We know that. They're not perfect, but they over and over again have said, we're open to what they call a two-state solution.
Two-state solution, yeah.
So if you'll recognize our right to be here, which Hamas will not and will never, even Fatah, which is the more moderate group, refuses to admit that Israel has a right to the land.
Yeah, their motto says it all.
Yeah, it's from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Well, that means from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. That means pushing the Jews into the ocean.
Exactly.
Don't be fooled by the language. That's what it means. So the Israelis thought, if we give the Palestinians this piece of land that we know is the Gaza Strip, then maybe we'll have peace. We'll give you land. So it was literally, it was land for peace. And in 2005, Israel force relocated its own citizens out of that region and said to the Palestinians, go. It's a port city. There's lots of resources. Go build it up. And to this day, people don't know this either, Israel has been providing them with electricity.
Yep.
So, and actual money's poured into Gaza to try to build it into an actual nation state, and it's been squandered.
Yeah.
And so then
corruption.
Yeah, exactly. And building for war.
Hamas won their first election.
Yep.
And then there's been none since.
That's the thing. So the Land for Peace didn't work. Hamas took over control. They run the government. They were allegedly voted in. That's, I don't know, maybe not. But they were voted in. They have control. And so
and most of their members come from other nations.
Correct. And they want to destroy Israel.
Correct.
That is their one goal. So that's why the fence gets built. That's why it becomes, you've heard the phrase, it's an open air prison.
Mm-hmm.
That's to some extent that's true because they can't leave.
Right.
But they have everything they need there to build a life and to build a nation state if they want to, if they will just seek peace, and they will not do it.
And part of the reason the overcrowding even exists today is that it is an enclave for supporters of the From the River to the Sea movement, of getting rid of Israel, the anti-Zionist movement.
Yeah.
It is an enclave for them. They desire to go there. You don't have a population boom in an area that size. I mean, what is it, 25 miles by 6 or something?
Yeah, it's barely bigger than the Santa Cruz Valley.
Yeah, you don't have a population boom from the 100,000s to the 2 million in 20 years without repatriation to some degree.
Right.
Which you brought up the Zionist movement after World War I and Britain regaining control. That is a fascinating time and does complicate things a little bit in terms of where we are today.
Right.
Because there were Jews from around the world, particularly from Eastern Europe, who were relocating to Israel, and this is pre-World War I. And so then you have part of the history of the kibbutzes. You have these family units who are starting up a life and trying to reclaim family land or purchasing and trying to live a very simple life. And as settlers, really, like that's what they are.
Right.
They're peaceful settlers who are trying to live off the land and trying to go back to their ethnic roots in that.
Right.
Those people are typically not the ones who wanted to go to war. They're not the ones who wanted to fight in 67 and 73. They're the ones who just said, can I just live peacefully? And they're the ones who were living in Gaza.
Right.
They're the ones who were living peacefully with other Arabs in Gaza prior to the formation of what we know today as the Gaza Strip and being separated.
Right.
They were the ones who were then relocated, and it was their families who are the ones who were first attacked.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the lineage that's there. So you have this massive overpopulation that is not full of only what we might term as like innocent civilians who were born there. Yes, some people were.
Right.
But there are also some people there, and I would say at least a decent percentage of the population who's there, who were from other nations.
Yes.
Who do not want to see Israel exist and are there to support Hamas and to see an end to the nation of Israel.
Right.
That makes this very complicated.
Yeah.
This is not the same even as you opened up saying, hey, countries have wars.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we're acknowledging. But then it's added complication because there is such a severe hatred for a people group here that is underlying the goal of Hamas, which is not as simple as, hey, we just want land. And I think I was talking to somebody about this, and I don't remember, and it's probably generated a lot of heat, but this is quite a bit different than what is going on in Russia and Ukraine right now. And I'm not trying to make an equivalence of one is better than the other or worse than the other, but I do think there are substantive differences here. In Ukraine, there's not the same hatred that exists generationally here in
You
Israel.
can't compare, you cannot compare the Arab-Israeli hatred to anything else.
It is unlike anything else.
Right.
So when we look at that, even the war crimes that have been occurring in Ukraine are atrocious. We have church friends who are over there, and it has been brutal. Even still, it has not been to the level of what we've seen in the last 4 days.
Right. Yeah,
it's been 4 days or 5 days, and we've seen some of the worst scenes that we've seen since World War II.
Yeah.
That's That's really wild to hear about stories of the butchering. Now, this does happen in other places that we don't hear about. This happened in the Rwandan genocide.
Yeah.
This happened with Pol Pot. This happened with Idi Amin. There are wicked people who have existed since World War II. But man, in our memories, it is hard to fathom this kind of wickedness because it's been a long time.
And it's visible.
Since we've seen
Social media's changed
Yes.
that. It's visible now. And you see the stories, and you see the body bags. And it's heartbreaking. It really is. I mean, so we should probably talk about, okay, so Israel, as we're again recording this tonight, they're on the border of Gaza with some 700,000 soldiers ready to go in.
Preparing an incursion.
And the rocket barrages in Gaza have been severe. Everything's coming down. And
neighborhoods are being leveled.
And they intend to scrape it until they get rid of Hamas. And I think that's the right goal, because I think you and I would agree civilian casualties are always bad in war.
Yeah.
Every Christian should be able to say that.
Yeah.
We don't want to ever take the position to say, no, we are now for genocide because of what Hamas did. Hamas is a group of very wicked men. Does that mean we want an entire race of people wiped out? No. We want Hamas eliminated from the earth because they're in evil. We're doing imprecatory psalms right now. We can ask the Lord to judge and punish those wicked men, but there will be innocents caught in the crossfire.
Unfortunately.
And that is heartbreaking as well. I'm not saying that Israel shouldn't do what they need to do. They have this scourge. It's like ISIS. Everybody finally realized ISIS needed to be eliminated from the earth. Everybody agreed. Civilization agreed. We have to get to that point with Hamas.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to change.
And this is their enclave. And
Yes.
that's the sad part.
Yes.
And they have chosen a tactic that they've used for their 20 years of existence.
Yeah.
And has been used before by others. Honestly, it's a religious dynamic, and maybe for another time we can go into why that is. But what they're doing is they do use human shields.
They do.
And with every bomb that we see, launched from an Israeli jet or from Israel's side, Israel sends warnings. They send texts. They send calls. They tell people with notice, get out of this radius, so that you are not hurt. So the fact that we continue to see women and children as the ones who are dying, and not as many men, and that is something that infuriates me. Yeah, because these are not men who fight with Hamas. Right. These are wicked individuals used by the enemy of enemies. Yeah. Used by the adversary. There is a spiritual component to wickedness. These hide behind women and children. There is nothing commendable, even in war, to do that. Yeah. Men are the ones who should be, if they want to fight, let them fight. Let them fight, right. But don't put the women and children in the way. And so when you hear on the news, when they report, and they will, whether you watch NBC, Fox, CNN, doesn't matter who you're watching, BBC, they will tell you that out of Gaza, the majority of the casualties are women and children. Right. And you need to say why. Right. And when you think, why aren't there men there? You have to know, because they're putting the women and children in harm's way to make a point for their cause. Yeah, you got to know that's been their strategy since 2005. Now, it's backfired on them this time, so let me just explain. Since 2005, the strategy seems to have been, we launch rockets, by the way, indiscriminately. They have no guidance on them. Correct. So they can land anywhere. Correct. We shoot these rockets, we try to kill some Israelis, we try to wreak some havoc, we try to terrorize them. And then when they fire back at us, we use our social media to say, oh, look at the children who have been killed by Israel. And the world reacts to that. And the UN condemns Israel. And everybody in the West we clutch our pearls. And Hamas wins. Yeah, they build the sympathy. Right. Yeah. They started it, but they win because they're good at that PR. And they're in the open air prison. Correct. So we're the oppressed class. And boy, we should probably talk about this as well. They have got the attention of, for example, students on university campuses. Yeah. It's atrocious. You've got students on university campuses coming out waving Palestinian flags and chanting, from the river to the sea. And they're not saying they're supporting Palestinian people, civilians. No. They're saying they support Hamas. Right.
And they want Israel wiped out.
Yeah.
It's atrocious. But they've always won with this strategy. This time, the grotesque nature of this attack has, I think, finally caused Israel to say, we're not playing that game anymore. We don't care how many social media shots you have of children. We need to finish this. And sadly, I think they do. I think they got to finish it.
I think one of the most heartbreaking videos that I saw over the weekend was after one of the kibbutzes had been raided, and the men who had survived and whose families had been just desecrated were taking bats and crowbars, pieces of metal, and attacking the vehicles that the attackers had come in. And they were beating those vehicles with the ferocity as if they were the attackers. And when they were interviewed afterwards, they said, I don't care if my country doesn't go in there, I'm going in there.
Right.
And when you think about that level of pain and heartache and the willingness to go and enact vengeance, yes, there's part of it where we say, that we feel it. Yeah. And then there's part of us that breaks when we know that more violence is going to be the result.
Yeah.
And so we feel it. We feel yes, if my family is attacked, do I not want the vengeance? And at the same time, to recognize this is going to be a cycle that continues.
Right.
And the thing is, it is.
Yeah.
This is the cycle that they've been in, and it is heartbreaking.
Yeah. And as believers, we've got to guard our hearts here because, vengeance it belongs to the Lord, but we also need to oppose evil.
Yes.
And evil sometimes, like with ISIS is to me the ultimate example because they were nothing but evil incarnate.
Yeah.
And we all said you can't negotiate with that. It just needs to be wiped out.
Right.
And so
there's no rehabilitation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's talk about those encouragements, Jeff, because you're helping us turn our hearts here. Vengeance is the Lord. So, principally, I thought of a few principles that I think are helpful for believers. I think it can be really easy for us to jump to conclusions and to say, whether it's right or wrong, or I don't mean about the wicked things. I mean about how people feel about Israel as a nation, or, if, there are the believers today that are anti-Israel. And it's weird to me because I think, you're grafted in. The only reason you have a blessing is because of them.
Right.
If Jesus didn't come to the Jews, you don't exist. You have no hope anyways. You may exist, but you have no hope. So I think the first principle that I would give to believers is before you start talking, listen. Listen to gain understanding. Listen to hear. Proverbs 1:5 encourages us to do that.
Yeah.
And don't be the fool that just lashes out. Proverbs 18:13 cautions us. That quick response, responding without hearing, is literally foolish. And I've already seen foolishness on social media.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of foolishness from professing believers. Twitter or X or whatever it's going to be called. That is at the one point, like you mentioned, a spot where you can get raw news that's unfiltered. And so that can help to inform. And then on the other side, you can get those people who just want the soundbite.
Right.
And so those aren't the news things that you're getting, but you're seeing them and you're like, oh my goodness, they serve in our government.
Yeah.
And they profess Christ and they're saying they're conservative and yet they're saying these things. It's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It can be really wild. So that's one principle. The second big one that I had, and let you jump in here, was just the grief and despair, the lament that we should have when we see wicked things. You mentioned, it brought you to tears on Saturday. I mean, there have been several nights I've just been up, just praying. Not able to go to sleep, losing sleep, waking up early, but not being able to get out of bed because I'm praying.
Yeah.
There are pastors that I know who are in Israel who have had their family members essentially drafted into the war, and this is going to affect a lot of people that many of us know. So this is not a far away war even. But it's one we know, and you and I have walked in those places.
Yeah.
Beersheba, we've walked there together.
Yeah.
And that's just a stone's throw from where they want to attack next, where Hamas threatened. So grieving with those who grieve, God is compassionate, and we do remember that. Like even as Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, he notes in Lamentations that the grief and despair that are brought by God are temporary still. And so we do grieve, but we don't grieve as those without hope.
Yeah.
We grieve as those who have hope. God is compassionate, and there will be a day. I know we'll talk tonight, but even moving forward in Unshakable, talking about the role that location, that geography plays in world history, in the eventual culmination of all things.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, this is Wednesday, so there's so much to see what happens, but we at Oak Hill have a trip planned.
Yeah.
3 weeks from tonight, we're supposed to leave. And that looks probably like it's not going to happen now. But had a chance to reach out to the woman who was going to be our tour guide, just to check on her. And she lives at Yad Hashmona, which is a Messianic believing community, about 50 miles from Gaza. So she's safe. She said we spend a lot of time running to our rocket shelter.
Yeah,
but
which every Israeli house built since 1993 is going to have.
Yeah,
a bomb-proof room.
Yeah. So she said it could be worse. We're safe. But she said, and this is the thing, she asked for prayer. She said, every single man in my village has been called up and will be fighting in the next 2 days. Talked to my contact at Sarel Tours, who helps us on the ground. And my contact said, yeah, we have employees whose brothers and husbands have been killed already or kidnapped. So yeah, it's personal for Israelis, very, very personal.
Yeah,
but they move there knowing the risks, especially those in those kibbutzes near Gaza. They know the risks. They're hardy people. They're resilient people, but they're fiercely patriotic. And so yeah, it's tough. It's hard to, in terms of what you asked about listening. I had somebody in our church reach out to me a couple of days ago and say, hey, I've got this friend who's saying all these things about Israel, and how do I respond? And then I want to make a post on Facebook, and I just said, look, please don't. I said, for right now, look, if you've got an unbelieving person who's uninformed about the situation, you are not going to change their mind.
Right.
That conversation is probably not going to be fruitful. That post on Facebook is likely to just inflame things. So now's the time to, like you said, just listen. If you can add a little context to people in conversation, hey, have you thought about this, thought about that? That's wonderful. But now's not the time to get on your soapbox and preach. Know what you believe and why you believe it, but at the same time, listen carefully right now. And if people are hurting, then step in with the gospel.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of grief going around.
There is. You mentioned the ancient history here.
Yeah.
And I do think that we don't have to dig in super deep, but I do think that's important to highlight. We read in Romans 10 and 11, and oftentimes I think in our conservative circles, we almost use it as like a finger wagging moment. Like, oh, you Jews, you didn't get it, you know, first time around, and you rejected the Messiah.
Right.
And I think we can be arrogant, even in our best attempts to try to be humble in this. I don't typically see many Christians be overly sympathetic to Jews.
Right.
But I think to a Christian, we would all affirm Jesus was a Jew.
Yeah.
Jesus
our faith
came to the Jews.
Yeah, our faith grows out of it. Right.
And one day,
right,
it still means something.
Yeah.
Whether somebody lines up with a covenant theological position or not, and I'm not trying to take shots and swing on that, but the reality is we exist as believers today, grafted in.
Right.
We do.
Right.
There are some Messianic Jews who are not grafted in,
right,
but part of the line.
Right. Yeah.
Romans 10 and 11 talk about us being grafted in.
Yeah.
And it talks about the promise being to the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And several years ago, I know you actually preached on this. I don't know if the sermons are still alive, so we'll pull them out of the archive maybe. But this is a hard, because we went through Romans.
Yeah, right.
As a church. This is a hard set of passages to understand, but I also think it's very humbling to remember that God's not done with Israel.
And the land still matters.
The land matters.
Especially when you read in Zechariah where it says his feet will be on the Mount of Olives, right? That he will stand on the Mount of Olives. So and he will walk to his temple.
Yeah.
So there's a physical aspect to his return. The battle that he will fight is in the land. So it matters. And so we can't just ignore it. And he was a Jew. And without Judaism, what are we built on? Right? So we've got to have empathy, and we've got to care. I mean, you can, even if you want, you say, well, my theology, I'm different, Israel's replaced, blah, blah, blah. Would love to have that debate with you. But just from a practical standpoint, this is a Western style democracy surrounded by Arab dictatorships. They deserve our love and our support and our prayer.
Yeah.
And because the land is special, in fact, this Sunday, again, this will post the day after this Sunday, we're going to talk about the beauty of Zion from Psalm 48. Now, it's symbolic of other things, and we'll get into that, but it does matter.
Yeah.
So, yeah, read Romans 10:11.
I mean, God chose it.
Yeah.
We didn't choose it.
Right.
And that's what's fascinating, right?
Right.
God told Abraham to go up on Mount Moriah. When we think about God's choosing, we can't diminish that and try to soft pedal it just to fit a theological system even.
Right.
Is what I would caution.
Right.
But even in that, you're highlighting the importance to grieve with others, to care for them. And that's one of our principles in our covenant.
That's right.
In our church covenant, our fifth principle is that we're going to basically be with people in their joys and in their sorrows.
Right.
We're going to weep with those who are weeping.
Right.
And now, even though we may not share faith, because there absolutely are people in Israel who don't believe in Jesus as Messiah, but there are people who do.
Yeah.
And whether they're people who do or people who don't, there is atrocities being committed right now they're some of the worst that I've seen and heard of. And traveling around, I've had the privilege to see Arab nations, to spend time there. I've had the privilege to see nations, many nations, various, from Western culture to African culture. The last one, I just need some Latin culture. That's where I need to go. But in all these other nations, I see the effects of Islam. I see the effects of Buddhism. I see the effects of Hinduism. I see the effects of Catholicism or Orthodox Christianity, which is not Christianity. I see the effects of all these things, but I got to tell you, some of the most unsafe, unfriendly, most intense places are those places that are operated by Islam. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that to scare anyone or to make a judgment of hatred. I'm saying when you said pray for them because they're surrounded.
Right.
Yes, I have felt what it's like to be in a village surrounded by Muslims who, when they find out that I'm a Christian, everything changes. Yeah. And they're watching me. Mm-hmm. But I've also seen this. I've seen Muslims come to faith. I've seen people that come from a Muslim background come to Jesus. Now, personally, I've only talked to Jews who've come to faith, meaning I haven't heard all the stories of transformation. But what's so special is you think about that place has a stage for the end of days. Mm-hmm. It is the stage for the end of days. Right. There will be, on that end of days when it's over, there will be Christians. From today, there will be people who had a background of Judaism. Mm-hmm. There will be people from the background of Islam. Mm-hmm. There will be people from the background of Buddhism and Hinduism praising Jesus. Yeah. That's our great hope. Right. We need to remember that as we're wrestling with what does the word Palestinian mean, and what is Hamas as an organization, and it's not an organization, they're terrorists. Mm-hmm. What is going on? Why is Israel responding so fiercely? When I see rubble, more rubble in Gaza than I see in Israel, how do I make sense of that? Right. When we're beginning to come to grips and asking the hard questions, I think we also need to remember, okay, pause. At the end of the day, at the end of days, Jesus is going to return. Mm-hmm. Like you just read, he is going to set his feet on the Mount of Olives. Right. He is going to reclaim his land that he chose. That's right. Not that we chose. Yeah. And in all of that, there are going to be people from every race, nation, tribe, tongue who are praising his name. Amen. Not praising our name. So we don't want to get caught up in that propaganda. Yeah. Not the propaganda of a political movement or political statement. That doesn't mean we don't care. Right. We absolutely care about righteousness. We care about pursuing justice, things that that please God.
Yeah.
I mean, Micah 6:8 says to do justice, to love
mercy.
loving kindness or mercy,
Mm-hmm.
and to walk humbly with your God.
Right.
It's not the sacrifices that you bring, it's really your whole self, which again is reiterated in Romans 12:1 and 2, of being a living sacrifice. What are some other encouragements as you're interacting with believers that you would give?
Yeah. Let me also say something, just because it's coming up in my brain as we're talking about these things. I want to be careful. You've talked about Muslims, and there is obviously a radical aspect of that. The Arab people themselves can be some of the most wonderful people.
Yeah.
You've met them. I've met them. So I want to be careful, so lest anybody make an accusation against us. It's interesting. There's more Christian Arabs in Israel than Israeli Christians. Israeli Christians are actually very unusual, but there's a number of Arabs that have come to Christ.
Yeah.
And by the way, Arabs that are wonderful Israeli citizens. So it's a mixed bag. So we got to be careful. So
I met several of them.
Yeah.
I've been in the home.
Right.
I've had dinner.
Yeah.
With a wonderful Arab who lives in Israel and invited me with his family. I've been in Nazareth and I've spent time with Arabs there. And
we've had some wonderful tour guides and bus drivers that we've gotten to know who are Arab.
Absolutely.
And even Arab Muslims living in Israel, but loyal Israeli citizens. So understand what Hamas is. You said it. They are terrorists. They are ISIS. They are Al-Qaeda. And we just got to make sure we make those distinctions.
Yeah, no, that's good, Jeff. I'm glad you highlighted that.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to come away thinking that there's just hatred against a people group.
Right.
I think, and this is probably good for a future episode too, to talk about the distinctions, as we were talking about this with Ken earlier, to talk about the distinctions of what different religions are actually proposing.
Yeah.
When we're talking about what they actually propose, because then there's like, you talk about a person, we're coming up on Reformation. It is Reformation month right now.
Yeah.
And so there's a feeling that the Reformed people have about Catholics.
Right.
There's a feeling, right?
Right.
With that doesn't mean every person that is part of the Catholic faith is, just the absolute worst. And, but it does, there are things that come with the Catholic faith that are not faith. They're not faith in Christ. They're not following Jesus as revealed in God's word. There are distinctions. It's good to make sure we recognize those, but we recognize at the end of the day in the Reformation, you cannot earn your faith. That's a key thought that's brought forward.
Justification is pretty important.
By faith.
Yeah.
And so we see that religion of Catholicism traps people at its zenith, right? At its most intense into doing something to earn salvation. I would say, and you mentioned earlier that the Muslim faith came about much later, right? It is probably the youngest world religion.
It is.
In that, if you take it to its zenith, it is not peace.
No.
If you take it to its zenith, it is not union with God.
Right.
And it's not earning your salvation either.
Right.
It's your own glory at any cost.
Right. It's a death. Can I say it's a death cult?
Yes.
Ultimately, in an ultimate sense. I'm not saying day to day.
Correct.
Every
not
Muslim
the average
feels that
person
way. But that's the ultimate vision.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's domination and submission.
I think it would be good to walk through that someday, whether it's on a Thinking Tree or Unshakable. But those are distinctions.
Yep.
They're in there. So go ahead. You were going to give some encouragements.
Let's make sure we're responding. We're thinking rightly when we look at the news. And I actually was thinking about this on my way over to your place tonight. I need to tone down the news right now in my heart, because it's affecting my focus and my spirit, and I've got to be careful. I've got to guard myself carefully on that. So let's respond humbly and thoughtfully. Let's not be reactive. Let's not be overtly political right now. Let's just stand on what we know about righteousness and about truth. Nobody's perfect in this scenario.
Correct.
We can recognize, though, the wickedness and the fact that needs to be stamped out. And then we can also have empathy for what comes next.
Yeah.
And balancing all those things, it's a tension that we have to hold, but we can't swing from extreme to extreme.
Avoid the ditches.
Yes, exactly. Let's stay balanced on that. Let's, weep with those who weep. Let's pray for comfort for those who are, imagine you've lost your whole family in such a horrific way, or you've got somebody kidnapped. Pray for comfort for those, and pray for Messianic believers in the land to rise up to share the hope that we have in Christ. But there's a lot.
Yeah, there is. And I'm glad you finished with prayer. We texted briefly before church last Sunday,
Yeah.
Knowing that this had just happened. And so we did incorporate it into our prayer that day. and that really, I think as you look at all of the noise, and you mentioned that,
Yeah.
I think that's what we come back to. You said, let's focus on what we know to be true, and let's pray. Let's have that constant dialogue with God. That's not just the big moment of prayer, but that's the constant dialogue of, God, help this family that I just saw in the news.
Yeah,
God,
right.
Help this young person who lost their parents. God, help, this woman who's at Yad Hashmanah, who now everyone she knows is going up into war. And God, help the Arab bus driver that I knew when I was in Israel, and I don't know where he is, and I don't know what's going on with his family. They're in the West Bank, and it's so complicated. But let's keep going to the Lord in prayer. Let's keep asking Him to be good in the midst of a broken world, and to see the gospel go forth, that we would have opportunities even in a horrendous situation to bring the gospel.
Yeah.
And so for right now, I think for all of us, the waiting and seeing, we can pray for our own team, as you mentioned, even, feelings of disappointment, discouragement, fear.
Yeah.
There's a lot there, but let's care for each other, and let's be Christ to others in their suffering and their difficulties, and help even to bring a level head to conversations, that we can bring grace-filled words.
Amen.
That's good. Well, friends, we'll resume our Thinking Tree program in the following week, depending on what the world looks like. But we do pray this conversation helped you, and we'll see you next time.